Thanks for checking out Collider Afterthoughts, the show that examines the content and fandom at Collider. We were so happy with last week's episode. Not only the show, but the reaction to the show. So I want to say thank you for listening to us last week. I want to say thank you for joining us again this week. I'm Ryan Snelling, Jaye Williams. What's going on?
That's me, J to the A to the Y to the E, back in here after Schmo. Happy 420, everybody. Smoke up or don't. It's up to you. But be careful because it's illegal.
You just said after Schmo.
Places. What did I say? After Schmo? You know what? I'm getting over it. I'm high as hell right now. I'm not. Just kidding.
Say I introed the show. I had a tagline, Collider Afterthoughts. You're still doing the after Schmo.
We went over your tagline. We're happy for you. I appreciate it. It's gonna take me a minute to get used to it. I'm feeling great, man. It's nighttime when we're recording this. I'm like a nocturnal animal. I'm at my best when I'm rummaging through the trash cans at night, the Collider trash cans, like a raccoon.
My first question to you, it's a nice little short one to get us kicked off here. How do you think Christian's wife responds when he is making fun of her mother on air?
You know what? That's a fantastic question because I guess I can relate to Christian in the sense where I do this content creation thing and I have a significant other and I go through these motions where I'll try to tell her about something that's going on and I see this I see this gaze in her eye where she's just like no longer listening to me. It takes about 3 seconds and I'm just like, you know what? I'm not even going to talk about this. There's some things that you just, if she listens and she gets pissed, then that's great because she listened. But if she didn't listen, then it's pretty much free game, fair game. Is that fair?
Well, would you ever make fun of your grandmother on air? What's your grandmother's name? Dusty, Crusty, what is it?
The answer to that question is 100%. But of course I would make fun of my grandmother. When you're trying to entertain the people, you'll go to some strange places just to get a chuckle from the non-existent crowd.
Are you not going to say what you call your grandmother? Because you just totally left everybody hanging. They have no idea why I made that joke.
For that joke, you have to tune into Sight and Sound. How about that?
Okay, find out what Jay calls his grandmother.
This week on Sight and Sound. I will be revealing it.
Speaking of last week's reactions to the show, and we have... I cannot wait to share what last Friday was like for us because it's really funny, and we'll get into some of the podcast network talk because another week down, week 2, if you will. But when it comes to reactions to the show, Jay and I talk a lot about people in that studio not having any idea who we are, and we'll talk about the Snep thing later. A+ on that homework assignment, by the way. One of the best interactions we've ever had with someone in that studio took place in last week's comments on the YouTube channel. Do you want to explain what happened with Frank?
So Frank Leguizamo, whatever his name is, that guy, he was having lunch with Mark Fernandez. We know this because we received a photo of this, and
yes.
Mark was pitching us to this individual, and which is great. I love that the boss of this place is a supporter, and he can spread the good word about it. I mean, somebody's got to do it, and I think they were sitting at lunch and conversing, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'll check the show out." He dives into it. He's like, "Oh, this is neat. They're talking about things that I do," until we just drop a sledgehammer of a joke on him.
Yeah.
And welcome to Afterthoughts.
Right. I accused him of working out of a closet. You said he didn't deserve to go to San Francisco with Cobster. So.
That's not what I said. I just was surprised that they would send them. I mean, there's so many other people.
So his comment on the his comment on the SK Plus video was, "Why shouldn't I get to go to San Francisco?" And you and I had a back and forth. Like, I wonder if he's being playful or I wonder if he's actually upset about what we said. And the more and more I thought about it, for one, we meant nothing by it at all. For one, we've never interacted with Frank. We've never had a reason to. But at the same time, part of me was like, you know what? If he was actually upset, I don't know if I would be. I guess I kind of realized at that moment that I'm done explaining the show. You know what I mean?
Well, a few things from this. Listen, everybody, if this is your first time listening to Afterthoughts on episode 2, and you work at Collider and you're diving into this, it's all in good fun. We love you guys.
Yeah.
Just to sort of lay the groundwork here, Mark Ellis once called my mom an old hag on air, and I just thought it was, just a thing. So, we can dish it out, but we can also take it. My favorite part about this whole interaction is the fact that 100% we saw it. We're obviously talking about it now. Ryan Snelling, have you responded to this comment?
I think I just said LMAO.
Yeah, I haven't even responded to it. So
yeah, I just said LMAO. I thought it was funny. Like the idea of Collider Afterthoughts, everyone in that studio just has to know it's extremely obvious. We're doing this out of love. So whenever we make a joke, I'm just not going to explain it. You can debate on if it's funny. You can say I'm not funny. That's fine. But we have a sense of humor about this stuff. We take advantage of not having relationships with certain people, and yeah, we like to throw things out like that. So, but anyway, Frank, we don't know you, but we love you blindly, I guess. So let's walk through last Friday, and we'll talk about sort of the latest week in the podcast network. So last Friday was really interesting because it was our debut, and I woke up, I was pumped, I turned in the MP3 on time, I was ready to go, and I sent it to RB3 so they could go out on SK+, and I emailed Thad. I was like, Thad, what's up, man? My name's Ryan Snelling. I'm giving you all of this, the description, everything they needed to upload our stuff. And the day progressed, and I realized, oh my God, the debut of Collider Afterthoughts is coming out on the same day as the free-for-all. So I texted Jaye Williams and said, we are so fucked. And from then on out, I spiraled out of control. RB3 put it up on time, but we had no idea when the podcast was coming out. And then we started thinking about Friday content in general. It was just a massive mess last Friday, right?
Yeah, and I think the ultimate sense of anxiety, and you're obviously more prone to get anxiety than I am about stuff like this, but
how you doing?
We talked a little bit on the last episode of After Schmo, the fact that everything that we're I'm specifically talking about the last After Schmo episode. We talked about
confusing.
We talked about the fact that everything that we do, everything that we're a part of, we have our hands on. We do a lot of stuff and control how it's distributed, how the content comes out, our schedules, all this stuff. So, when we first started doing the other show for somebody else, yeah, we had to relinquish some of that control. But now going into having somebody else handle our stuff, there's going to be some growing pains, but I think our stress level was we just didn't know when it was going to come out at all. Like there was no communication in that regard. Obviously, that's something we know now. And we were trying to formulate our own plan of attack in terms of how to promote it, how to let people know, how to inform, because that's very important with this whole podcast feed. It's still something that everybody's trying to get used to. So we're trying to inform our own audience that still exists. Obviously, the new people will find it as well. We were just trying to coordinate all that. We came to the conclusion on Friday that it wouldn't be in our best interest to let people know it was out specifically when it came out, because it was going to be swallowed by a lot of the stuff going on with the Schmo Down, and rightfully so. So once we were talking to Christian, we found out that it was going to come out at 9 o'clock our time on East Coast and 6 p.m. on the West Coast. So it's like a drive time thing on the West Coast. It was just stressful for a second. We didn't know if it was going to happen. Never got an email back from Thad. Would have been nice.
Yeah, what the hell?
A nice little confirmation email. And listen, I know we're probably going to get, I was busy. One of our friends, our very close friends, once told us he hates hearing people talk on podcasts about how busy they are because everybody's fucking busy. So I've been thinking about that for a really, really long time. For some reason, my Siri is going off in the background. Anyways.
I've just been thinking about the fact that Thad never responded. He didn't let us know when it was going up. He didn't say nice to meet you. Literally nothing. How is that professional, Thad? How is that professional? Please. I demand more out of Thad Williams. And he still hasn't followed me on Twitter. I don't know what the hell is that about. And Christian hasn't followed me on Instagram. 2 years.
The only person that follows me on Instagram is Mark Ellis. But that's just because he's delightful and a nice guy.
He is a damn nice guy. So anyway, so there's that. Let's talk about Friday though, because we started thinking about the fact that One-on-One was also released. Of course, the Schmo Down, and the Schmo Down has its own podcast as well. Is Friday a crowded day for content because Afterthoughts is on now, because One-on-One, another show on the podcast network, comes out on Friday? Or does it matter because you still have the entire weekend to do all this stuff? We sort of had a nice back and forth about this off air, but we've also had a week to think about it a little bit more, and I didn't know if your stance on this had changed or not.
So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer for this. I think the bigger question here, or maybe not the bigger question, the bigger picture to look at, it's not just about Friday. It's just about being a Collider fan or somebody that takes in Collider content and being inundated with more content from Collider than we ever have been, and sort of having to come to terms with that. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I think Friday specifically, it is a crowded day, but you're right. You throw in 2 extra days for that stuff to breathe. And yeah, you get mailbag on those days, but other than that, it's just essentially all the stuff that came out on Friday plus the 2 mailbags, and you have a lot of content to go through. I can take it either way. That's more on the side of the people over in Burbank to figure out, like, what's the best way to distribute this stuff. And, we're going to figure all this out. The longer we are living with this podcast feed, the longer we are living with all this new content, we're going to figure out the most efficient way to sort of space it out and this and that. But luckily, it's all right there on your podcast feed for whatever you've subscribed to. And you, the listener, you, the subscriber, you, the fan, you're going to be the ones that are going to have to sort of weigh out your options, how much of the content you want to take in, when you want to take it in, and this and that.
We know that there are plans to sort of, we want to add a new YouTube channel in the way that Schmoes Know added SK Plus. We know that that's coming for all of these shows on the podcast network, so I think that will help separate it a little bit, but there's also an opportunity to, once that becomes a thing, we can do things like customize the YouTube banner and design the schedule, the release schedule. That way all of that, we sort of talked about how confusing it kind of is too for One-on-One. I guess we didn't expect for One-on-One to go ahead and make video content to put on the main channel, because if they were going to add the second channel, wouldn't One-on-One go there? If it does end up going there, then why did they put the first 2 up on Collider's main channel? Like, there's a lot of that we still haven't quite figured out yet. Like, is One-on-One a Collider video or is it a Collider podcast, right?
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about that too. I feel like, just to answer your question right here though, I think One-on-One has already fallen into the realm of a new core show specifically, because I think that it's, and when we look at the numbers here in a minute, we'll dive deeper into this, but I think it's a show that Collider needs, Collider Video, Collider Proper needs. So yeah, I think you pick and choose. You say, hey, you over there that's playing in the D League, let's bring you up to the bigs here. And, they hit a few home runs in their first 2 games. It works really, really well. I think part of it, one thing that I sort of just want to throw out there, just to be completely transparent with people, we don't upload our own content. We send it to somebody to upload. we joke sometimes, or we've joked in the past about how we feel like we're Collider East over here in Kentucky, podcasting from Kentucky. And sometimes I think to myself, like, man, it'd be great if we could upload that stuff, just because people are so, obviously for our own selfish reasons, but it would be beneficial for us to do that, considering nothing takes place on East Coast time with Collider, and actually most of the U.S. most of the U.S. is ahead of them in time. So would it be beneficial to have people in remote locations, aka us, be able to upload stuff in the morning to take advantage on the East Coast morning time schedule with some of this stuff?
Some of that's been scheduled pretty well going back to SK Plus, and I guess that's to Cobster's credit, because he was sort of the person who organized all of us and made the schedule. Top 10 would go out like bright and early. Like some of our shows go up at like noon or 3 p.m. Eastern, but like Top 10 was always available when I woke up.
So the reason why that is, obviously, and you know this,
I do know,
informing our audience, is because Top 10 isn't a show that's dependent weekly on topical information. I mean, to a certain extent, like, yeah, they want to do like the I don't know for sure, but they want to do the top 10 MCU films for the Avengers, but they can foresee that. They can forecast that out in terms of their themes, where most shows on Collider are topical. They do come out because of specific events and this and that, and they're a live show and all of that. Like we could do our show, on a Monday and deliver it to be up on a Friday, but then we would have missed like an entire week of Collider, so it wouldn't be conducive to the stuff.
They've done it before. I don't know if they do it all the time, but they also record them at like 4 at a time, like blocks, you said, right? Because they're able to sort of forecast that. But anyway, I'd also, and this is still kind of self-involved, but like I think the Collider.com podcast came out on a different day this week on Collider Factory. Originally came out on a Wednesday, and I think the first episode, came out on a Wednesday, and then this week it came out on a Tuesday, if I'm thinking of that correctly. So I think a little bit more organization with all of that will help. And I think part of it too, though, it's like going back to the whole like Thad thing, and I was sort of just thinking about the communication of it all, and I still don't know, because even part of our anxiety was, why didn't Perry talk about us on Movie Talk? Why didn't Perry talk about us on Movie Talk? And maybe the plan was never to promote Afterthoughts on Friday, because there is a lot of stuff going on. But at the same time, part of me was just thinking, again, and we make jokes about it, we talk about it, but I still don't know how many people know what's going on with us there. So that's why I was happy to see Fernandez do that thing with Frank, and Ellis played ball. I sort of gave out a homework assignment last week. I wanted him to pitch the promo to somebody else, and he played ball and told Schnepp about us on air, and Schnepp also said that Christian talked to him about it off air. So I like that conversation. I would have loved to have heard that conversation, because off air I think Schnepp would have been like, what the fuck is that? But he was nice on air, and so yeah, I'm glad that those wheels are starting to turn there, and I think they are still in the process of learning, because it doesn't even have to be about Afterthoughts. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a self-involved conversation. I'm curious how many of them are thinking about the podcast network in general. I wonder how many of them realize what's going on with the one-on-one and the body slam and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, to give the benefit of the doubt with all of this, it is new, and with anything that's new to us or to an audience, it's also going to be new to the people behind the scenes. It's of no surprise to me that certain people like Christian and Mark, and I'm sure Cobster and Cody behind the scenes, are familiar with the inner workings of this, because they've been doing stuff like this for a very, very long time, whether it's running Schmo's Know YouTube stuff, or SK Plus, or just distributing a bunch of other content via their outlets. They understand this a little bit more. Like, our heads have to be outside of just this building. And I think it's just going to take some time to get everybody else wrapped up into that. And obviously they're still working on building the rest of their, employee infrastructure there as well. I'm sure there will be a whole team of individuals that could handle some of this stuff just to distribute the workload, or so that it's not always on Christian's mind. We were also made aware, and we knew this, but Christian is the podcast guy, and he's the one we're supposed to go to in terms of the podcast feed stuff. But I'm sure he does want to delegate out some of that responsibility.
So he made an announcement at first earlier in the week. He said that Sinead might be his guest. I think that has changed. The show will have already been out when this is out, but he interviewed Hayden Zito, I think is how you pronounce his last name. He was one of the funniest characters in Edge of 17, which is funny because I just rewatched that movie like on Monday, and I had a lot of fun. It was the second time I'd seen it. I was having a lot of fun with his character, and it was sort of amazing that he ended up being Christian's next guest. So I'm excited to hear about that. Last week you sort of brought up Christian feeling down on this show when it came to the return in views, but it seems to be a pretty consistent show so far, right?
Yeah, well, first of all, just to touch on guests, we also sort of got via his carpool that O'Shea Jackson was going to be one of his guests, and he had to pull out last second, and there was sort of this new rule that Christian was trying to establish, which I've been bit by this too, where you have a guest, you think they're nailed down, and it sort of falls through at the last minute, so it's probably not best to promote stuff until it's actually happened or taken place. But it's hard to, because you get excited, and I definitely understand that. But yeah, I mean, this is, again, so we sort of reported on the numbers of one-on-one last week, and we both sort of came to the conclusion that it was a success. Over the weekend that it had been released, it had gotten 20,000 views, and for a brand new show, and it's grown since then, obviously, but for a brand new show, for a show that just feels completely different from anything Collider's ever done, and something that's not specifically topical, that's a hit to me. But we always needed to look at the consistency. If there was a big drop-off on the next week, we know that people kind of tuned in to check it out for the first time, decided whether or not it was for them. And you throw into the whole fact, again, like we've already talked about, the sort of the bottleneck effect of Fridays. I mean, you have the free-for-all as well. I could have easily looked at these numbers and saw a drop and said, yeah, that kind of makes sense this week because of everything going on. However, that's just not the case at all. In fact, it did the exact same numbers. Like the second week, over the weekend, it did 20,000 views, which is, again, massive. It's such a big deal when you have consistency like that across programming, but especially new programming like that. It's very, very impressive.
It's obviously great that Podcast One is helping out with that show. But to be totally honest, it's like names like Dan Fogler and names like Clancy Brown. We're not new. Like, I don't even know if I talked about this. I don't know if Christian knows this because I've actually recently learned Christian is a big fan of Chris Hardwick. So Nerdist, the Nerdist podcast, was the very first podcast I ever listened to when I got into podcasts, like, 5 or 6 years ago, whenever it was. So I am no stranger to that type of show. I'd actually be curious to know if he gets some of that. I mean, he's obviously a big Howard Stern fan, but I wonder if he's thinking about Chris Hardwick's podcast as well, because it's very similar. And so I'm no stranger to that long-form conversation with a guest, and sometimes they're massive guests, and sometimes they're smaller guests. Same with Joe Rogan. I never know who his guest is until I've finished the episode. So, but anyway, point being, Clancy Brown, Dan Fogler, they are faces, but not names that casual audiences don't. They're not faces that we know necessarily. But I can only imagine the day when Podcast Network is like, here's Joaquin Phoenix, or just somebody crazy. And so I think that's really going to help skyrocket that show. But hopefully it's just a matter of time. We will have to see about that.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think there's probably a point where it could get like that. But ultimately, like I said last week, what you want, the investment that you want from your fans and your listeners, and viewers is you just want them to tune in to watch the show, period, regardless of who's on, because you enjoy the conversation that the host is having. So hopefully that's a goal that they reach.
Definitely. I think that's pretty much all I have on the podcast network. I don't know why I said that so weird. The podcast network. Do you have anything?
Remind me of somebody that we both.
Oh, that's true. Oh, I was doing an impression. You're absolutely right. But you won't know. So do you want to move on to, we're still kind of playing catch up a little bit. Do you want to go to, let's just talk about Jedi Council as a whole here, because we are recording this later on a Thursday night. So did you watch or listen this week's as well, Jedi Council?
I did. I watched probably half of it while I was eating some delicious chicken wings, because yes, hashtag I am keto again. And I was covering my fingers with hot sauce and watching this magic take place. When I say magic, I mean the gloriousness that we didn't get to touch on last week of this new graphics package, but also just the immense, it was like they literally walked underneath of a ladder or stepped on some cracks or had a black cat cross their path before the episode. This episode was filled with bad luck. At one point, I looked out my window because I thought there was an emergency outside because sirens were going off. And I was like, where is this taking place at? And I paused the video and I realized that the sirens were going off on Collider, on the screen from in the Collider studios, which is crazy. I've never seen that happen before. It had to be super annoying. It happened like 2 times, and so much so to where they had to address it. They were like, we apologize for this. Christian knocked over his water and spilled it all over his laptop at another portion of the show. It was just, I felt bad for him. I was like, man, this is, and obviously having the big guest, her name skips my mind right now. I apologize.
Vanessa Marshall.
Names. There you go. And what an incredible guest. And I love when people come into Jedi Council and because people can come on that show and maybe they're just not huge fans of Star Wars. Like I got that from like the Laura Dern interviews that we got. Like she obviously is aware of what Star Wars is, but maybe doesn't dive deep into the same stuff that a show like Jedi Council does. I could easily see people coming on as guests, big guests, who are similar to that, but not a lot of the guests they have. They're very knowledgeable. They have this fandom that's equal to the people that host on a regular basis. So it was a fantastic episode.
It was great. We recorded before last week's episode. So last week, I was pretty upset we didn't get to address it because it was sort of like a hit in the nuts, that new package, because Jedi Council might have accidentally become the best looking show on Collider Video. And
you like that?
Yeah, I love what Jedi Council looks like right now. I love the red. It's just as striking as the reveal of the Last Jedi logo. I remember when everybody was talking about Star Wars going red when that logo came up, and so I love the red in Jedi Council. I also love the graphics and the animations that introduce each segment of the show. And so last week they asked people to name the droid, and he said the name of the droid today. What the hell was that? What was the droid?
It's C0 L1 D3R. It spells out Collider, and like you know how Mr. Robot titles their episodes. It's like
it's like leet speak. But
yeah.
But Jay, I'm gonna do this for a second. I'm gonna sit here for a second. For one, when I heard the name, I didn't remember. I didn't hear the one, I guess. So when he spelled it out, even though when it was in leet speak, I thought he said colder, and I was like, why the hell did they name the droid colder in leet speak? And then I had to rewind it, and I still didn't hear the one. And I was like, I know that they were going for Collider, but this is obviously not Collider. So going back to that point, even if they did include the one, they're still missing an L. And then it goes back to, and then I'm thinking, why did they include the vowels at all? If you just look at the name in general, why did they pick the hardest Why wouldn't it be CLDR?
You're just jealous because you didn't come up with the name. That's what this comes down to.
I'm not jealous that I didn't come up with that name. I'm jealous I didn't come up with a name that they used.
Yeah. So see, he can judge all day, but where's your name, dog? Where's your robot name?
I don't care for it, and I'm not gonna call the droid by that name. Let's.
Whoa. I actually have a nitpick here. And it goes with the graphics package, but it's purely because out of nostalgia. I do miss the old spoiler alert notification that comes up. The one that comes up now, you can like barely see because it's just like it's like spoiler alert. I mean, it just like kind of like pops up. It doesn't have that same kabloosh factor that the other one has, and I feel like Cody has a fun, or whoever, Adam, they have a fun time hitting the spoiler alert button. It's kind of like it's like they're talking to from behind the switching board. And now it's just like, hey, we're here. Spoiler alert. Like, it's easy to miss now.
I guess I haven't thought about it because I don't think I've ever been affected by a spoiler on that show. I know that they talked about, this is a personal thing. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. But like for instance, I know they talked about Rebels season 4, but I'm so far behind on Rebels, I have no idea when I'm going to catch up. It didn't matter to me to hear them. I knew that whatever they said about Rebels, I was going to forget by the time I watched the show, so it wouldn't have mattered. But I know that's just a me thing. I know other people, it actually matters. I've talked about this before. Most of the time when I watch Collider content, I'm watching it through my Xbox on my TV. So even back in the early days when they introduced, this is actually something that they might not realize. Maybe they do, I don't know. But if you watch it through your Xbox or a PlayStation and you're just sitting there watching it on TV, I don't have time to react quick enough to pause the video, because more often than not,
have you ever sprinted out of your room like, no?
I haven't done that, because thankfully every single spoiler they've revealed, it's never affected me. But if there was going to be a spoiler that affected me, there's no way I can get to, my controller might be turned off, and then you have to wait a second to turn on the controller. I guess if anything, I could grab my TV remote and hit mute real quick. But more often than not, the spoiler warning is never in enough time for me to actually do anything about it. So I'm surprised. I'm very surprised to this day that Collider has not ruined anything for me.
I'm laughing. Funny. I'm laughing about this right now because I forgot. I was remembering that I legitimately had this exact reaction this week, but it had nothing to do with Collider. This is sort of a side story. Where I listen to The Fighter and the Kid, and you know how sometimes you listen to a podcast and you don't tune out, but you're just like in autopilot mode, like you're just listening and not really sometimes even thinking about specifically what they're talking about. Do you ever go through that with listening to podcasts?
Yeah, like Movie Talk and Jedi Council.
Okay,
all those
anyway,
podcasts.
so I was listening, and all of a sudden I realized that they started talking about A Quiet Place, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And then all of a sudden I remembered that this podcast is not a movie podcast, and they do like what might be a spoiler to them. Like they said, like, no spoilers, obviously. And then they started talking about what the monster looked like, and I was like, holy shit. Like, I was trying to turn it off as quick as possible. And so for everybody out there that does get worried about spoiler stuff on Collider, at least know, I'm not saying it doesn't ever happen. I mean, Chris Stuckman literally spoiled Black Panther for me in his movie review, but at least they're knowledgeable of it, a little bit more knowledgeable, and you can feel a little bit more safe with it.
And you're not even someone who actually cares that much about spoilers, which is weird.
Yeah, I don't.
Compared to spoiler culture in general, like, I care way more about spoilers than you do, and I just admitted that I've never really had a problem with it. So it's funny that you pick that stuff out.
Yeah, there's certain things that I look at and I'm like, I kind of want to have this experience.
Sure.
But some things I just don't care about, like Game of Thrones spoilers. Oh, I'm all about it. I'll read up every second before I watch something.
So anyway, Jedi Council was fantastic, and I started getting excited because I was thinking about the differences and the similarities between Council and Heroes. I cannot wait to see what the new Heroes looks like. I thought that they might have already... I figured they would have already done it already, but even when you look at the thumbnail is still using the older green and black, or the white and green logo compared to what the podcast network uses. So I think it's just a matter. It's probably going to happen next week where we see that new logo and maybe the new animated package. But regardless, I'm really, really excited to see what they do or don't do because, Snep does run that show differently than Christian runs Council.
Yeah, it's a weird time right now. Actually, I was thinking about this while I was watching Jedi Council. We've never had Star Wars running up against like a big, like Star Wars anticipation and this and that. Of course, Solo is a different animal. Like, I don't feel that same sort of buzz for Solo that I did for Last Jedi, and there's a myriad of different reasons for that. But it is interesting to think about that we have this and Infinity War butted up so close to each other, and you have both of these shows running side by side, literally supporting both sides of that anticipation level. So it is interesting to see it, but both shows lately I've sort of picked up on how different their tones are. Both are fine, obviously. This isn't a criticism by any means, more of just an observation. It feels like on Heroes, they just straight up nerd out. Like when they talk about things like the 1000th Superman issue that's coming out, like it's just like a nerd fest of them, being nostalgic about something specifically, where Jedi Council is I feel like, obviously they can be goofy and have a lot of fun and this and that, but it seems like a little bit more straight-laced, a little bit more of a deep dive sort of, like I find out things on Jedi Council that there's just no way in hell I would ever be able to find out on my own. And I'm not saying that's not the case with comic books. In fact, it's just a different sort of vibe. Like on Heroes, I will just find out about things that I don't even necessarily care about, but find interesting, and then they just joke about it for like 20 minutes, and I think it's great. Like I like the dynamic of the two episodes. One is a little bit more like kooky and off the wall. The other one is a little bit more trying to do like a pretty straightforward show, and then you have Christian spilling his water on his computer.
Snep is one of the best characters Collider has. I've always been a big fan of his. What's nuts is you and I have a funny habit of listening to things, or at least we don't mind to listen to things like podcasts or shows that we don't completely know 100% about. And I think Heroes, more so than Jedi Council, there are more times when I'm watching that show, and depending on the day that you ask me, I couldn't decide which one I like more. I don't miss an episode of either one, of Heroes or Council, but Heroes, more so than Council, talks about and mentions a lot of things that I don't have any reference for. The amount of names of artists and writers and storylines. Of course, I know the familiar names, the Bendis and Kirby. I know all of the common names, but there are some names that get thrown out there. I'm just like, I have no idea how you can be a fan of comic books, because comic book fandom is very intimidating, and I feel like I get it. Like, I get it. I read comics growing up, but comics is still a hard thing to get into, and but it's just funny how much I enjoy listening to it because of that reason. I also love, I'm only bringing this up because I think Snep might be listening to this episode. Maybe. But God, I lose it every time he hunches over to the mic real close just to say the word morons. Have you picked up on that? It's like,
yeah. Sometimes I feel like he's talking to me. No, I think Snep, you're right. He is one of the most cherished characters that exists, and he I feel like more than anybody else is responsible for that like super nerd fandom, let's get sweaty sort of tone. Like when they did an episode this week of Heroes where they were sort of exploring this idea of a certain group of characters in the MCU being introduced into is it called? Are they the Eternals? Is that what their
Yes,
name is?
they are.
Being introduced into the MCU, and I thought that there was going to be some sort of like story attached to it. That really wasn't what it was about. They were sort of just like speculating, like, "Oh, wouldn't it be cool if this happened?" But they made it work. I mean, they made it interesting. They made it fascinating. That's a type of conversation that fans would have, and more than anybody else, I feel like in the Collider space. Schnepp comes at it with more of like a casual, maybe not necessarily a casual fan perspective, but I feel like I'm just sitting in on a group of people, maybe not necessarily like breaking down news from a pundit's perspective, but sitting in on just a group of friends hanging out talking about comic books. That's what it feels like when he's hosting shows.
Both shows, they all have great guests, but Heroes has Schnepp and Robert Meyer Burnett, which is a powerhouse coupling. That's something I can't think of the powerhouse coupling that Jedi Council has. Yes, they all have great guests, great hosts.
I think Ken and Christian are really good with each other.
They're good with each other, but it's not in the way that
it's not the same.
I was gonna say it doesn't feel like, to use the term sweating. It doesn't feel like they are sweating over it. They have great discussion. That's not what I'm saying. It's just sort of a different. It just feels different, and I love hearing those two people talk, even though, like, I guess with Ken and Christian, the point is I know what they're talking about because I love Star Wars and I understand their conversation and where they're coming from. I mostly have opinions on what they're talking about. But when it comes to what Schnepp and R&B do, they're talking about things I don't have opinions on because I'm not knowledgeable, but I'm obsessed with the conversation anyway. So it's almost like I'm in love with just their admiration for whatever they're talking about, even though I'm totally excluded. I think that has a huge part to play in why I love that so much. It's so weird. It's a weird thing to talk about, but you morons. Okay, very good. Collider makes great shows.
Oh yeah, you like that? That's a good thing. You gotta have something to talk about.
Okay, so I think we are moving on. Let's talk about, like, sort of in the way we lumped both episodes of Jedi Council together. We can sort of lump Harloff and Ellis in here real quick because we missed last week's, but we did catch this week's, and they mentioned us quite a bit. I feel like this week.
Real quick, I feel like we should at least explain something real quick because I don't want to just gloss over the fact that we might have some listeners that aren't familiar with what it is or might not be aware of what Harloff and Ellis is. It was sort of the spinoff of the Schmo Down live show, and it's just Mark and Christian doing their own little one-on-one hangout session podcast talking about whatever they want to talk about over on the Schmo Down YouTube channel. We feel, obviously, because we come from that world and they do talk, they're obviously Collider personalities, and because they do break some Collider news there, we definitely want to roll it into the conversations here whenever we can.
Yeah. So, and also because that's when they message or they speak about us freely, excuse me. But, so they did do that. And, so we got confirmation. The last time we talked about this, we were reacting to this idea of top 10 playing the Lions Den in a basketball game. So not only did we get confirmation that this is still in the works, Fernandez is totally on board. So with that said, with that knowledge, it's bound to happen. And Fernandez was also contributing ideas because they mentioned him shooting something with Rappaport on a basketball court, and so they've already nailed down. They've already nailed down. They're going to do it outside. It's going to be, of course, it's going to be half court, but those are details that were missing from the very first time that they talked about it. Half court, 2 of 3, or best of 3, I should say. And so they threw out a lot of these details, and I was super excited because we're getting closer and closer to this, what must be a ridiculous basketball match.
I have a bone to pick with Christian about this real quick because I was watching one of his carpools one time when he was talking about us talking about the basketball game, and he brought up the whole thing about me saying that Rappaport would be a great get for this basketball thing, and he was like, "Yeah, that is a good idea, but I mean, yeah, it'd be nice to get him if it works out with his schedule." Listen, guy. We're not talking about Sandra Bullock here, man. Like, the guy, you can't keep him away from Collider or LA, it seems. All right? He's like really good friends with Fernandez. It's not completely out of the realm of possibility for you to incorporate Michael Rappaport onto the show. You're trying to get him on Movie Talk, and he doesn't want to talk about the movies you guys want to talk about.
Yeah, he doesn't want to talk about fucking Snoke, but
he was like, oh, if we could get him, come on, you can get him.
Well, not only could they get them, but that was also, at the time, that was just one of those things that it was just like, that would be a really great idea. But he sort of, it's always funny. We talk about it. It's always funny, the things that he picks out of our show. Like,
it is
we always, every time he brings up After Schmo or Afterthoughts, we think to ourselves, why was that the thing that he picked apart? Why was that the thing that bothered him enough to bring it up on air? Because it's like, we just mentioned, we didn't even criticize. We didn't say we didn't want Ellis to ref. We didn't say you have to get Rappaport. It was a conversation of, wouldn't it be great if Rappaport was the guest host? And then that was it.
You know what? I know exactly why he picks out what he's picking out. He's in between aisles at the grocery store.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And the other parts that he doesn't bring up, it's because he's zoned out like you and I do.
You want to talk about LaCroix for a second?
I'm actually drinking a LaCroix right now. I'm drinking a lemon LaCroix. For those of you who don't know, I think some people are confused as to what LaCroix is, and I'm going to give you my stance on LaCroix before we criticize theirs. So, LaCroix is not supposed to be anything. So when people argue with me, oh, this doesn't have a flavor. No. I understand that LaCroix has all these flavors, but you can't pick them apart. The only difference might be the smell of it. But ultimately, if I buy a pack of lemon LaCroix, if I buy a pack of lime LaCroix, they all just taste like LaCroix, okay? Like, there's no reason why anyone should like or dislike any flavor more than the other, because...
Well, that's not true.
Hold on. Ultimately, they're all just LaCroix. With that said, they did bring up, apparently Christian's family is not on board with coconut water. And I think you and I... Or coconut LaCroix, excuse me. And I think you and I are in agreement. We're fans of coconut, but Christian drinks berry LaCroix. And again, I've just said...
I've got to roll back on something real quick.
Can I finish my point? I'm almost done.
No, just hang on. I've got to roll something back, because you can't categorize them all as just LaCroix, especially when one of them is plain. One of them doesn't have something that the rest of them have. And I get what you're saying, but you painted with a broad brush. And I'm a passionate about my passion fruit, okay? Passionate from miles away, as Aubrey once said on his hit single, okay? And I'm a little fucking fired up right now about this LaCroix talk. I don't know why it happened. For some reason, we're known as the LaCroix boys, all right? Our Sight and Sound family and friends just gave us the crown. So you schmoes, you need to watch your mouth when you're talking shit about LaCroix, especially what might be the most glorious flavor to ever exist, coconut. I'm sorry that your virginous LaCroix mouths can't enjoy the nectar of the gods that is coconut LaCroix. Have you ever tried coconut LaCroix with vodka and a twist of lime? I mean, it's just great, man. Just try it. All right, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Sorry.
And my point is, you know who I hate? You know, the person that I hated growing up was the person who preferred one colored Skittle over the other. And I remember, because every time they mentioned it, my fist would stop right at their face, because they're all Skittles. I'm not saying they don't have flavors, but they all taste more like Skittles is still more so the universal flavor that overpowers the individual flavor. And that's my point with LaCroix. Like, if anyone ever said to me, I don't like lemon LaCroix, but I love regular LaCroix, I'd kick them in the nuts because that's just not a thing. So my point is, it's ridiculous to be particular, except with Berry LaCroix. Berry LaCroix is the only one out of all of them, and I've had all the flavors. Berry LaCroix is the only one that actually has a different taste than the other, and it's legitimately terrible.
Yeah,
and Christian drinks Berry LaCroix. I've seen it happen on screen. So going back to your precious coconut, I'm with you. I'm on board with the coconut. You only get the smell of coconut because LaCroix is just LaCroix. So it's not a problem.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, coconut LaCroix on the surface doesn't make sense. Okay, and we have a hard pass to be talking about this right now. One, because our listeners, they love Ryan and Jaye Beverage Talk, and two,
how you doing?
Christian at one time told us that we could talk about beverages as much as we wanted, as long as it was in the middle of the show. Anyways,
don't get me started on Starbucks taking that day off on May 29th. No, I'm just joking. I have nothing bad to say about that, actually.
What else are we missing about Harloff and Ellis? Am I leaving anything out?
They announced, well, it's been announced several times. I guess it was the confirmation of the next live Schmo Down announcement that is taking place on June 2nd, which is really exciting. I think the curveball there, Christian mentioned he wanted to have it again in California. I didn't realize it would be in the exact same place. And sort of as they just explained it, that they wanted to make California sort of lay the foundation, if you will, of the Schmo Down fandom foundation is to be laid in California and build that up first before they are ready and willing to sort of take it out on the road. And I think that makes 100% logical sense.
Absolutely, it does. I mean, you see a lot of bands actually who are based out of California just tour around California for a really long period of time because, hey, I don't know if you knew this or not, but California, it's almost as tall as the entire country. So it's pretty big. There's a lot of ground to cover. The matchup specifically, listen, obviously we know there's a show. That was an announcement too. I should have thrown that out there, that the Schmo Down Rundown. Okay, we need to roll this back a little bit. So with the podcast feed, it was announced, I think I've got this right, that even though the movie Trivia Schmo Down has its own podcast feed, they are moving it, the Schmo Down audio feed or whatever, the Schmo Down audio broadcast will be on the Collider Factory now, and Schmo Down Rundown will also be on the Collider Factory. So that was some news that actually broke on Twitter. Did you see that?
No, I had no idea that was happening.
Yes, so that happened. Obviously the Schmo Down Rundown guys are gonna get down and dirty with all this stuff, just as a reaction from our feeble little Schmo Down brains.
Hold on. What's your take on that? Because I know they're coming from a place. Again, I just heard this news on air, so I haven't really digested it yet. But I don't know if I agree with that.
I do. I agree with it 100%.
But I'm not saying I don't understand the logic. I get it. Because as far as I know, the movie Trivia Schmo Down was probably the podcast feed that wasn't performing as well as the others. But at the same time, it's like the Schmo Down, in the way that Collider.com's podcast, or in the way that Body Slam isn't quite a thing that you're like pushing to promote, like I just feel like the Schmo Down still needs to be an entity. So it can still, I don't know. I think it works differently because the .com, those are just like, it's sort of like pilot season is what Factory is, right? But
sort of. I mean, I guess so. But you also have to look at it as a platform, right? It has an existing audience base because it was the Collider podcast feed that had already existed. So yes, it can be a place to try out new shows, but it can also be a launching pad for other things as well. We can't discount all the people who just take in Collider content via the podcast feed that don't want to go to YouTube and that might not even know what the Schmo Down really is. So potentially distributing it to those individuals is great, but it would also be a huge problem, I think, if the Rundown were to port over from SK Plus, where they had a big following, to a podcast feed that didn't have as many people there. And we have a great opportunity to grow along with the Movie Talk feed, right? But if they're going over to a feed that might not be quite as popular, why not just go ahead and put them on a feed like the Factory to let them have as much exposure as possible?
Yeah, but Afterthoughts is just more niche. And I feel like for whatever reason, if
more niche than the Rundown?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think so at all. I mean, we're talking about an entire channel's worth of stuff. Maybe coming at it from our perspective is particularly niche. It is. They're both niche things, and I don't even like saying niche. I like saying niche. They're niche things. However, the Schmo Down Rundown, you have to be a fan of this content so much already. You have to be a fan of this specific content. It's not talking about pop culture stuff. It's trivia with this, and this isn't discounting it at all. I'm just saying, like, it's asking more of you to be a fan, in my opinion, of something like the Schmo Down, and then to go into a deep dive podcast like that talks about statistics and characters and drama. Oh my God, you've got to be. I mean, this is as inside baseball as inside baseball gets.
I'm saying it's more niche. A podcast that examines a company, content, and fandom is way more niche than the Schmo Down is a living, breathing organism. And the idea of having a sports-centric show and what Rundown is, that is not so much a new idea in the way that Collider Afterthoughts seems to be a new idea. We still have people who don't even get the concept of what you and I are doing.
Yeah, I just completely disagree with you, man. I mean, I get what you're saying. You're coming at it from the idea of what it is, but yes, you're right. In terms of a sports show for a sport, yeah, obviously that makes sense. But it's not like you can't just go. You can come into our show without watching any of the content that we talk about and just get on board with it for the most part. You might not get all the jokes and this and that, but with this, like, you have to watch the content. You have to know the personalities. You have to know the drama going in with it. I mean, it's a show for the super fans, and so is our show to a certain extent. But you don't have to be a super fan, and that's fine if we disagree on it. It's not a big deal. I'm not going to sit here and try to,
I don't know,
make you understand.
Part of me just thinks that like if I was trying to get somebody into the Schmo Down, I mean, obviously I would go to the YouTube channel first, but I just like the idea of showing them its own podcast feed as if it was this own thing. Like, I feel like I would lose them if I went to Collider Factory. But then again, I guess it might segue into a conversation about the podcast network in general. But like, as far as I know, I don't know the SK Plus podcast numbers. I don't know the Schmo's No podcast feed numbers. But looking at SK Plus, the YouTube channel, Rundown was always a bigger show than what you and I did anyway. So I don't know. I'm just not totally there yet. And I know I'm going to get a text. Well, actually, this is why you're wrong. But it's just, I don't know. I just don't see it as well right now. So, I don't know though. This is actually a good segue. Okay. I'm excited about the live Schmo Down announcement. Can't wait to talk about it. I want to segue real quick and make a quick point about Harloff Carpool. And when it comes to the Schmo Down discussion. So, there's been some funny back and forth between me and Christian. I've made the point on the show before that there are just levels of fandom when it comes to this stuff. There are people that don't participate in the movie trivia Schmo Down fit page. There's people like us that casually watch the Schmo Down. There's diehard Schmo Down fans that make their own podcast for the Schmo Down. There's diehard Schmo Down fans that listen to every podcast about the Schmo Down. There are different levels of fandom. And people watch the actual Schmo Down video differently. You either just watch the map or you watch the entire file that's been uploaded. I've made that point before, and so Christian and I have had some funny back and forth between our shows because I've made the point before that I don't need to watch Carpool when it's purely a Schmo Down talk. I never said Christian shouldn't do it. I've never said I've never spoken anything badly to that point. I've just said I don't need to watch it because I don't take in extra content for the Schmo Down. I just watch the match. So the question I want to pose to you, because it's funny because there are days that you and we watch Carpool. There are days when I've missed an episode and I've said, what have I missed? And you've said to me, he talked about the Schmo Down. And I've said, okay, very good. I don't need to I don't need to go into it. But I think that if Christian is to continue Carpool, and he didn't do it at all this week, maybe he'll do it tomorrow and surprise us. I think Christian should take the time, and if he knows he has things to say, whether it's breaking news or just things he wants to discuss with the Schmo Down, I don't think he should do it on Carpool anymore, because I think he's missing an opportunity, and I think he would have more eyes on him if he split up Carpool and did maybe 15 minutes on his Facebook Live and then went to the Collider video Instagram and then went live there. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, again, I'm sort of on a different page. I think by breaking big news of any sort, I mean, he broke the podcast feed news there, and he breaks big Schmo Down stuff there. Basically, if the word gets out, hey, Christian breaks interesting news for people on this show, it works as a marketing tool, so to speak, for his show. Like I can't miss Christian's Carpool if he's breaking all this stuff. So there's that, obviously. I mean, I don't know. It's weird. It's weird for me because I can relate in the sense that I want to. I've always wanted a show. I mean, there's nothing stopping me, I guess, where I can just talk about whatever the hell I want. So in that regard, and I don't think it's too much to ask your audience to say, "Hey, I'm going to talk about this today." You can tune out if you want to, or you can hop along for it if you want to. It's no big deal. But then again, I'm also used to. I mean, Joe Rogan's podcast is like that. Sometimes he'll have comedians on, and most people can listen, or sometimes he'll go on a deep dive about MMA. But granted, he did end up branding some of his shows the MMA show. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know me, man. I'm the whatever guy. I don't think he's so invested in it that he's thinking of like the business strategies specifically for Carpool on a regular basis. Maybe he is. I could be wrong. I have no idea.
So I don't want him to misunderstand me. I don't want any of the listeners to misunderstand me. I'm not asking Christian to go to Instagram to get the Schmo Down out of my face. That's not what I'm saying. I just think they started out, Christian and Fernandez said that there was going to be more live video on their Instagram feed. They're trying to build that social media up.
As there should be, yeah.
So I guess, and maybe I started this conversation suggesting that he do this here and this here, but maybe just get rid of that. But ultimately, the point I'm arriving at is just organize it to where it's sort of at both. And I would challenge you a little bit because you did say you wouldn't miss an episode of Carpool, but if you got a notification that Collider video was live, you would still go to it. So
absolutely.
I don't think, I was going to say, so that's not going to go away.
It's part of our job.
I guess my blanket point is that if he has 40 minutes in the car, he could think about, hey, what can I do here on Carpool, and then do all of I'm not going to even tell him how to do it. I'm just going to say, what if you split that long Carpool up and made an effort to do the Collider video Instagram feed, maybe break Schmo Down stuff 2 of the 3 days that you do Carpool. Just any sort of way to implement both platforms is basically my point, because they just haven't done the Collider video Instagram stuff yet. So
yeah,
as far as the live video, I should say.
So I see where you're coming from, absolutely. But I also, just to throw this out there for people that might not watch his Carpool stuff, he made it very apparent from day one that one of the benefits about him doing it on his own personal Facebook page was the fact that he could really talk about whatever he want and say however he felt, that it's his platform. If he wants to talk about politics, he can. He doesn't feel like talking about politics, for instance, or social issues, whatever, belongs on something like a corporate type of platform. I say corporate in air quotes, but because then it would be more associated with, obviously, that, and you don't want personal opinion in that regard to filter its way into to that type of content that people might not go there specifically for. What I will say is I do agree with you in the sense where, of course, they need to be doing those live videos on Facebook, Collider's Facebook. In fact, Collider's Facebook in general needs a sort of a overhaul. Like right now, it's just a spillover page for content. It's just like, hey, you're not finding your content on YouTube. Guess what? You can find it on Facebook now, and it's primarily driven by the .com. I would like to see more interesting ways. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But here's my thing about Instagram Live. It's funny that you're bringing up Christian doing it on Instagram Live. Here's why I don't want Christian to do Instagram Live stuff. Other than a handful of other people that are dabbling in some extra things, Christian is the only one who is like proactively, at least to my knowledge, from what I can see with my own eyes, I'm not involved in meetings. He's the only one that's proactively going out and at least trying some of this new stuff. Like somebody else in that building needs to take it upon themselves to step up and say, you know what, I'm going to try, ask permission if you need to, but I think I'm going to go on Instagram Live and just start talking about Infinity War or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah.
Or there's no reason why. I'm just going to throw out a name. I'm not throwing shade at anybody, but like, there's no reason why Wendy can't just fire up the Instagram Live and say, hey, I wanted to let you guys know what my top 10 favorite films of all time are. Like, get in the comments, debate with me, whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
Other people need to get involved.
Yeah, I mean, I only brought up Christian because I was speaking to the time that he sets aside to do that anyway. But yeah, that's a totally different conversation. Christian, you're absolutely right. I mean, that like the Schmo Down, Collider Live, or I said live, Instagram Live, excuse me, should just be its own living, breathing thing. Because Wendy is a great idea. Or when there's Schmo Down stuff to be broken, Thad, because Thad is the commissioner, but he doesn't really say anything at all about the Schmo Down. So if you're going to play that up, why doesn't Thad do that? He's only really in the skits of the Schmo Down, as far as I know. But.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, we're not deep into Schmo Down stuff as much as like the Rundown guys, but Thad is portraying a character like a.
I'll say something to Frank about it.
I don't mean to be. Hopefully, I'm not going to get in trouble for this, but I'm pretty sure Christian is still pulling the strings there. So Thad is kind of just I could be wrong, but maybe Thad is doing what Christian is just telling him to do. I don't know. So maybe he doesn't. Maybe he has to get clearance to go on Facebook Live, or it has to be in a storyline. I have no idea. I don't know.
Well, you're not wrong. So there's that.
But there's no reason. There's no reason why Cobster or Cody couldn't go on there or develop some kind of content for that platform.
Right. Absolutely. No. Totally agree. Okay. Let's keep moving. We still have to talk about the free for all, and then we'll get into some stuff. Yeah, I know we're not a Schmo Down show, but this was an epic event, and it's important for Collider. So we'll talk about the free for all, and then we'll get into some other stuff that happened recently this week. How much fun was that free for all, man?
It was great. It was so great that we talked about watching it together, and I went behind your back and I watched it without you. I find it interesting to take in a lot of the Schmo Down stuff, a lot of the Schmo Down community from this outside perspective, right? I mean, that's what we do here at Afterthoughts, is we look at things from the outsider's perspective, from underneath of a microscope. And the conversation so far this year seems, to me at least, has been like a little doom and gloom, like, oh, the matches, I don't know these people as much, or the views are down, da-da-da-da-da. And I've talked at length before in the past about how they're very aware of what's going on right now. They use this initial third of the year, whatever it was, quarter of the year, to build up new competitors and this and that. And we all knew that the free-for-all, it's a turning point in every single Schmo Down season to not only get new people, but get existing people energized to a level that they potentially haven't gotten yet. Obviously, we've had big matches so far this year, but this was such a fantastic event, and for a lot of different reasons, I think, than last season. than last season's free for all was. It just so much about it was enjoyable. I was smiling ear to ear. It was a lot of fun. It was a tighter production, which I think you would come to expect, having this be the second time they've done it. Did you get that at all? Did you think it was a tighter production this year?
Oh yeah, definitely. I definitely could tell that it was the second time that they had done it. It's also funny because the experience with the spectacular also helps. And to my knowledge, I don't remember them mentioning this, and maybe they did, but you know how they brought in an associate producer with the spectacular? Did that same gentleman come back to do this?
I'm not sure, and in fact, I could be wrong. Is it the Owen Mugen guy that is on Ken's podcast from time to time? Somebody else would have to confirm for us, but I really don't know. Let me throw out just real quick, and I want to get your opinion. I have a favorite moment from the Schmo Down, like a moment more than any others. I just was like so happy about, and it got me super excited, and I was kind of fist pumping. And I think it might surprise you, but do you have a moment like that, and what is it?
Dennis walking out with a Coke Zero.
That's the one that got you.
Hands down, best moment of the match. Him and the Coke Zero.
The one that shocked me, that was like Sting descending from the rafters to beat up the rest of the NWO with a baseball bat, was the introduction of Mark Ellis into the show.
Yeah.
Because I had just written him off like, oh, he's off doing something else. And when he came in, I feel like we undersell people in the Schmo Down who have an immense amount of experience, people like a Makuga or a JTE. I feel like they're able to capitalize more on the spectacle of things because the nervousness or the competition, not that they don't take the competition seriously, but they've been there. They've done it before. They don't have that ring rust specifically, even though ring rust I think does exist. I think ring rust showed a little bit with Riley's inclusion, but it was great to see him. But Mark coming in there and him having that whole shtick of coming from the airport just made me so happy. He was incredible. The charisma he showed with the rest of the competitors, with Christian over at the table, it was incredible. I love Mark involved in the Schmo Down as a competitor.
The only note I have that's in all caps for the free for all, I wrote loved Ellis being there because it was a complete shock to me, but also he was special. It was just out of the gate funny, like you said, and I don't know. I think if there's one complaint, and it's not even a criticism because it's all about luck, right? But Ellis was another example of someone that you wish was able to stay in there longer. Some of my favorite competitors only lasted like one round. They were the first person out. So, but obviously that's just the design of the game, and of course you can't think too much of that. But yeah, people like that. There were a lot of great entrances. I mean, I loved Andrew Guy, for example, coming out when everyone thought it was Dan Murrell. I mean, that was really, really memorable to me. I didn't know Robert Meyer Burnett was going to pop out when he did, and he was going fucking nuts. And why was he dressed like he was in a Shakespeare play?
I'd never seen him with that scruff either. The other thing I need to bring up here real quick is, well, two things really. I cannot sleep on the inclusion of Ethan Irwin here, which was fantastic for me because, for those that don't know, when we were doing After Schmo, for the first little bit, I was doing these history lessons where I was going back and listening to older episodes of the Schmo's No Show, and Ethan Irwin was somebody who was on the show quite a bit. Not quite a bit. I mean, he wasn't on there as a co-host per se, but he was on frequently, and he was somebody that I knew. And this is a guy who came into a huge event at 1-0 and fucking crushed it. Like, if this guy isn't already your number one, like, most anticipated competitor, or potentially to have, if he has a full season, like your front runner for Rookie of the Year, then I think you're crazy. Like, I legitimately think you're crazy. I would debate anybody in that regard. The other thing that I want to throw out there too, you're right about competitors being eliminated quickly being like a strange thing to see, especially really strong competitors. But that just goes to how entertaining the game is and how much randomness is sort of like you could go 10 rounds with 5 correct answers but have one bad round and get eliminated. That's great about it, but I hope that nobody's sleeping on the fact that this competition might not have as much merit, so to say. Like I've seen a lot of criticism about the merit of how it ended. People wanted it to end with like one person being eliminated at the time. But let me just say this. If you went back last year to see Sam Levine win that against Finstock, or I guess at the time it was Tom Dagnino, regardless, whoever. If I would have told you by the end of that season that he won that, he would be your champion, you would have thought that I was crazy. People who win events like this, either they win it for a reason or a light switch gets turned in their head and they start, I'm not necessarily going to say they take things more serious, but they have an opportunity that they can capitalize on. And I don't know what Brienne's trajectory is with this whole thing. I don't know what her goals are to be a champion. Maybe it is. I don't know, but I wish her the best. It's a fantastic story that you can't write. And yeah, I hope they just eat it up because it was fantastic. I loved watching it.
Yeah, and even at the risk of sort of excluding a lot of our favorites, there were a lot of unsuspecting, Ethan Irwin being the standout, there were a lot of unsuspected talent got their time to shine.
Even,
so people
even
like
Bibiani to a certain extent. Like I know Bibiani.
But we get Bibiani.
But see,
right?
but here's
I'm talking more so about
sort of because Bibiani is a great competitor. We all know that he's a great Schmo Down competitor, but he has trouble closing. So the ability to stay in as long as he is, I don't know if it was maybe because he's capitalizing on more people at the table. I have no idea, but he has traditionally had trouble closing matches in the past.
I'm just saying I wasn't as shocked seeing him in the place that he was in. I was more shocked at the people I didn't know anything about that stuck out, like people like Sean Gerber and Frank Moran and even like Lon Harris and people like that. I was more so shocked at the people who were doing that than Bibiani just being smart at movie trivia. I mean, that's something that I'm pretty used to. So I was obviously Ethan Irwin is the prime example of that, but there were still a lot of other great competitors in there that showed their stuff. So also, and to talk about the pre-show real quick, it also this is the first time I've ever realized how many people that they have that you can utilize an acting background. Like Kalinowski is an actual actor. And people that aren't actors, like I don't know Thad's background, but Thad is good in those scenes. There are people. It's funny how well all of those. I would love to know the kind of conversation that Christian has, especially with the newcomers. I want to know if they have a conversation about like, are you comfortable acting? I would like to I wonder what that's like for a newcomer to come into the Schmo Down behind the scenes. Maybe that's just something you gauge on the fly. Maybe you realize the talent you have as you go on, and then you can develop these storylines. But like someone like a Rachel Cushing too, like she's slowly but surely gotten better in front of the camera in general. So I would love to know if Christian develops these people at all, or they sort of do it on their own. I'd be very curious because it's just the Schmo Down is lucky that they have so many people that involve themselves so much to where they act out all of these sketches and things. It's really great.
Yeah, I don't want to discount either the fact that I feel like the production that they're doing here is executed so well. And it doesn't surprise me because Christian is enamored with this, right? Obviously he is. He's so passionate about it, and he's able to execute it really, really well. We talk a lot of it. This is the free for all it's obviously a huge event for the Schmo Down, but it also acts as a thing that we talk about a lot on outside of this show. We talk about it being a proof of concept. It's for Patreon. Like, listen, this is what you're investing in. These are obviously huge matches huge events that we put a lot of time and effort into, but your money is going to the potential for us to do this level of stuff on a consistent basis, right? Like, we can go all out on these huge events, and we want them to feel special. And as time goes on, they will only feel more special. But the real goal is to make it to where you can make every single event have this level of energy. And having something like the Patreon, having people contribute to the Patreon helps in that regard.
Any opinions on the length? Well, I guess no. The question is, any thoughts on the amount of competitors used? Because I think about I'm thinking about what made like the Knapsack Sam Witwer match so important, because it felt more like there's a ticking clock. And I know that there's not a ticking clock element at all in the free-for-all, but I'm just thinking about, like, I don't know. I feel like the more rounds they have, or maybe the more competitors they have, the less urgency that you feel. Do you feel any of that at all?
No, not really. I mean, a lot of my excitement watching it's obviously the competition, but I'm really excited to see who comes out next, because depending on who it is, it can like really affect.
Oh yeah.
Just seeing people's reaction in the studio to who is coming out next was interesting, and whoever was sat at the table already, like if there's like a murderer's row or if it's just like a ragtag group. My only want, I guess, for the amount of people is and obviously there's nothing you can really do about this, but I just wish they had rounded it off to 50, because having that strange number of, what were they at, like 48? I'm just like
48.
Come on, can't you get the guy out of the broom closet to come compete? Just like
Frank.
Let's just round it off to a nice little 50. Like if they would have gotten to 49, it would have like bothered me even more. Like, let's just get to 50.
I don't know if it's the number itself. I don't know. Part of me, it was just kind of the urgency. I don't know. Maybe that's what it was, but maybe that's just my thing. But you're absolutely right, because that's one thing that we determined, is that seeing who comes out behind that curtain, no matter if it's 25 times or 48 times, that moment never gets old, because you are always ready to see who's next, and it's always exciting to see who comes through that curtain.
I also like the idea of using the free-for-all as like a sort of, as a testing ground for people, but also using it for people to dip their toes back into the water, like we saw with Riley. Like, it would have been nice, obviously, and I'm sure everybody's had this thought, but it would have been nice to see Merle make an appearance, just for the sole fact that, you know, him being there to be like, do I still have this in me? Obviously, he still has it in him, but like, do I still want to stay retired, or do I still want to be on this hiatus or whatever, or do I want to get back in the ring? That would have been a nice little treat, I think.
This isn't a trick question. Did you watch the pre-show?
I did. I watched most of it until I had to. What did I do? I was doing something simultaneously while I was watching. I think I was trying to do laundry while I was watching it in my laundry room, and I think I had to take the basket from the laundry room into my bedroom.
I don't know if it was Christian's office, but it was the room that he was eating out of when Jen walks in on him. Why is that office lit like a reptile house? Like, it looked like what the nocturnal animals live in at the zoo. It was so odd and yellow and weird. I was like, what is going on in that room?
I have a very dark office at my day job too. It's purely meant to intimidate people.
I also thought it was funny how they made it a point, and I might be revealing something, but I saw it with my own eyes. Like, the whole idea of them drawing numbers out of a hat. For one, they used Christian's gross hat with sweat and hair gel probably all over it. Ugh. And they all drew from his hat, but there were shots where Jen was just throwing the hat around, and like, because her arms are waving as she's talking, so she's just being animated, and naturally the hat's being moved around. I think they only had one number in that hat at a time. So I think there's always one slip of paper when somebody draws their number.
I think they're probably not pre-selected. I think there was some randomness to it, but I think they were probably pre-drawn and they were notified of their number. But I don't know. I could be wrong. I have no idea.
I don't know. All right, let's finally jump to some programming that happened this week, and let's just talk about movie talk because it was pretty fun this week. We got confirmation. I want to give you a shout out. I think Fernandez likes your 3 at the table idea, so you know it's fine. It's fine. It's okay. No, it's definitely apparent, and it's working. We had a lot more familiar faces this week than weeks past, but that was perfectly fine. We got some killer combos like we talked about, Schnepp and Christian and Ellis at the table. I know that we both love that combination. One thing that I forgot to bring up last week, and this is the Le Batard fan in me, even though they take it seriously, which is fine. I love the idea of them bringing back the poll inserted in the middle of the show. So that was something that Campia, I believe it was Campia. It was at least Campia era Collider. They introduced doing a poll at the beginning of Movie Talk. They put it on Twitter, and they would reveal the results the next day. It didn't really take hold. I think it only lasted a couple of weeks, but now they've utilized it. And it's funny because I saw Screen Junkies. Screen Junkies made this transition on Movie Fights. They're utilizing a capability on YouTube. If you guys have noticed that little eye that appears on your YouTube screen, that's where the poll appears. So I like them bringing back the Movie Talk poll.
Yeah, I mean, any sort of obviously it's not brand new, but any introduction to make the show, I think, more interactive for people is always a benefit. My takeaway from Movie Talk was more than any other week. It just I think it might have been down to what you said of just familiar faces. It seemed like a pretty standard week of Movie Talk. Nothing particularly wild and crazy and out of the ordinary to pick up on. I do want to throw this question out about the graphics package. So this is the show that has had the graphics package the most. We talked a little bit off air about the best way to utilize that graphics package. I think they're still trying to figure it out. I'm starting to notice like some weird transitions in between, like whenever Ellis is introducing a particular segment and he's throwing it to somebody, you'll get the shot of Ellis on the left, a video playing in the middle, and then whoever he's about to throw it to on the right. And as soon as they start talking, there's like a awkward jump cut. Maybe not even a jump cut. There's an awkward transition of the graphics to where it just like does like a hard shift to Ellis no longer being there. And I don't know if it's just me personally, but like it's become distracting to me, and it could just be because I'm watching it so intently for things. What's your take on how the graphics are utilized? Because I think for Jedi Council, it's utilized completely differently. Like just... And that's the other thing, too. I think with 3 people, you may not need to have those split screens quite as much. What's your take on all of that?
So I do pay attention to that kind of stuff. I left it out last week. I had some nitpicks. I mentioned that last week. I had nitpicks about Movie Talk, and they did apply to this idea. And so I do pay attention to the production of these shows as well as it's going on. I'm watching the graphics, and I'm not saying there isn't. I'm saying I haven't picked up on there being a reason for the things that they are doing other than the idea of playing a video clip. For example, today they talked about the Deadpool 2 trailer. So I understand the reason behind playing the trailer as Ellis is introducing the story. But when it comes to the switching, sometimes there are 3 pictures in camera, sometimes there are 2, sometimes there is 1. I haven't figured out, when it comes down to the switching of it, the rhyme or reason or the purpose for when they make those switches. And I would like to know, if there is one, I would like to know what it is. Because if I could just ask you, I'll ask you a quick and easy question. When and where should they play video clips? How long should they last?
Yeah, I think So because of the loop, the loop can potentially become redundant. I don't think it's necessarily specifically video clips that this is a thing with. I think it's just having the video clip. I think if they mix it up with video clip, still image, and I don't know, something else, maybe another graphic that they had, it would be fine to have that as like not a sidebar, but have that graphic up for a longer period of time. Other than that, I like the idea of just utilizing it while Mark is presenting the story. And then as soon as he throws it to the next person, they cut away from that big graphics package, pretty much the same way Jedi Council did it this week specifically. I can't remember exactly how they did it the first week that they had their graphics package. But actually, did they even use the video stuff with Jedi Council? Now that I'm thinking about it.
I listened to this week's show, but But last week they did not. It was just sort of the new lower third, and then the cuts to the animations or the graphics that introduce the segment. There's not like picture in picture sort of what they do with movie.
That's what I'm thinking of. Then it's just the ratio of just full screen talking head individual and cutting back and forth. And I think that's what it is, right? Just because you have a new graphics package, it doesn't have to be on all the time. Well, I mean, it is with the lower portion, but I think in the introduction of Mark's news story with that video, then get rid of it and just start bouncing.
Yeah, because you're right. Use it to intro. It's like you could use it to intro the segment, but then when it comes to the discussion portion, make it about the person speaking. I think the only thing that I don't understand is when it's three. So if it's Ellis and then Trailer and then Roca from left to right, that I don't get, because Roca could be talking on the right side. I'm trying to pay attention to him. You have a video in the middle. Why is Ellis even there? When traditionally, if Ellis just interrupted or started speaking or asked another question, you would just switch to only Ellis. So I think that's the only one that I'm confused by, is when it's three pictures in the frame, because it's just too many things to look at. So if I don't know if this is the case. I think I talked to Cody Hall earlier tonight. I think we are going to try to get a segment into next week's Afterthoughts. And I know that he doesn't primarily switch movie talk, but we can at least maybe pick at some of this stuff, and he can let us know what's going on. And, there's other questions that we want to ask Cody. So anyway, that's pretty much the main thing. Were you satisfied with Schnepp's Afterthoughts promo? Because I was just laughing the whole time. Yeah,
absolutely, I was.
He called us AfterBuzz. There's nothing better than that. Just it was great. So hopefully he's listening. I don't know if he actually intended on doing that or not. But yeah, we love you guys. Did you have anything on Movie Talk before we sort of wrap up with some other random things?
Well, yeah, I did. We just did the whole Movie Talk segment. That's all I had.
I just asked if you had any more before we moved on.
No.
Why is that a weird question?
Well, the way you phrased it was, do you have anything?
Oh, I thought I said anything else.
Well, yeah, I did.
Let's talk about something that happened in the Schmoeville Facebook group real quick, because I know you want to talk about it too, but I don't know if you actually said anything or if you just witnessed the happenings. But
yeah, I try to stay out of stuff like that as much as possible. Like, unless it's like, the only time I really got involved, I try to inform people about stuff, and I'll get involved if I get like super annoyed with things that are just completely unreasonable, like the Collider doom and gloom for a while. But this was just honestly a healthy debate and discussion. So there's no reason for me to really get involved with it. Obviously, because I'm going to have my say here.
Long story short, and I don't know how many of our listeners are in the Schmoeville Facebook group, but the Schmoeville Facebook group, started because of the Schmoes No fandom community. That's where the first iteration of this show started, was out of that Facebook group. So I do, even though I don't have an obligation to be there anymore necessarily with what I do now, I still stay there and sort of take the temperature, if you will. And so, long story short, the post introduced the idea of changing the Schmoeville Facebook group to some name including Collider, because of sort of how they are transitioning from channel to channel, if you will. And I don't care if it happens. It doesn't. I'm not saying Schmoeville needs to change, but I sort of I did throw in a vote and say, yeah, you could do it. Like, yeah, you should do it if you want. I think that'd be great because, I don't know. I think, you know, whether it's Sight and Sound or whatever, or The Watch or anything on the Ringer, it's like, I think a Facebook group, because the Facebook page idea is going away. Thanks a lot, Zuckerberg. But I think the Facebook group is something that could be utilized at Collider. I don't know. Obviously, you don't want a mutiny on your hands. If the community in the Schmoeville Facebook group don't want it to change, then I don't know if Collider should do it. Maybe they should just go on and make their own. But my vote was sort of, yeah, you could definitely do it. And that was just based on the idea of, yeah, they are sort of transitioning and going all hands on deck with Collider Video. But ultimately, if nothing happens, then nothing happens. I don't actually care.
Yeah, my take on this whole thing is I think under no circumstances should it change its name. In fact, I think it would be silly for it to even do so, for the sole fact that Collider content, since the Schmoes have been working with Collider, which was since Collider's inception, really, even before that with the AMC stuff, there's always been Collider content on there. I get the reasoning, the thinking behind it, because there's not as much Schmoes stuff. However, Schmoeville isn't just specifically about what happens on one particular channel or another. For me personally, and I came in more recent to this, okay? But Schmoeville represents a specific community of specific movie fans who were catered by the not way of thinking or way of life, the sort of the conducting of how the fans conducted themselves. They were shepherded along by Mark and Christian and the rest of the Schmoes Know space. So that's what that represents. Otherwise, if you're just willy-nilly going to be changing names, and it could be any Facebook group if it doesn't have that specific identity to me. Also, Schmoeville, there's no reason for Schmoeville to not just be a community of people talking about movies, and that's just what it's titled.
Right.
I think it would be a shame to do something like that, specifically too, because it's still celebrating where Mark and Christian are today, right? I mean, if you
Sure.
still had as much Schmoes content, you would still have the Collider content to put on there, because Mark and Christian are heavily involved with this space. So I just think it would be silly to just change the name just because of that. It seems like a little bit of it does feel like a little bit of an emotional response of like, well, we don't have Schmoes anymore, we might as well change the name. Like, and I get it.
Right.
I totally get it. But man, I don't know if that's specifically what should happen. But that's obviously, it's not my decision. But what I will say about this whole thing, and where I kind of wanted to take this conversation, was the need for the community aspect to exist for Collider. So before I ever did any of this stuff, I used to look at it from the outside perspective, because Ryan, you were involved in it. And I looked at it sort of with a little bit of jealousy, because I was in the music space and we didn't have communities like this. Not only did the music space not have any communities like this, what Schmoeville specifically is, the type of community that it is very, very, very rare. In fact, there are companies out there that would spend an immense amount of money to have that focus group of fans at their disposal. So much so that you and I, Ryan and Jaye, have a group as well, a Facebook group of people that we have sort of said that if you're going to be a part of this group, that here's how we need to conduct ourselves, respect people and this and that. It was started by our listeners. We didn't go out there and start it ourselves, and we celebrate that. That for us is very fun, but it's also incredibly invaluable. You have the voice of your die-hard ride or dies at your disposal at any time for their input, for that mirror that Collider likes to have looking back at them. It can be there beyond just myself and Ryan. It can be so much greater than that. It can be a great testing ground. It can be a great proving ground for things, a great place for communication. It can get out of hand sometimes, especially the more people that are in there. But I think it's down to the involvement of people at Collider. I will say I think that's something that's lacking in Schmoeville is there's not enough schmoes in Schmoeville right now that are, and I'm as guilty of that as you are or anybody else. But we are able to be in our Facebook group in order to, if something goes a little off kilter, we can sort of bring it back, and that's what needs to exist. I know Movie Talk by Movie Fans exists. You've had more experience with that. What's your take on this whole thing?
Well, for one, that group sucks. It's terrible. But no, I mean, yeah, I think we're having two different conversations. Whereas, like, I'm just indifferent on the name because I saw people. You're right. I was in the minority, I think, when it came to should we change the name or not. But I'm also just of the belief that a name change doesn't necessarily have to matter. Except
it doesn't. You're right.
But like, I guess where I was coming from, it's like right now as it stands is now, later, or never included in Schmoeville. So if you change the name, then you would add that video to it as well. So like, I guess less things would feel out of place. But again, that's all surface level stuff. It doesn't have to matter. That's why I'm indifferent of it actually happening or not. But most of the people who disagreed with me and said absolutely not, they are still scared. I don't know if scared's the word. They're still a little sketched out by all of this. Just the idea of change in general. When I was sort of the mindset of, you know what, the name could change and then you could just keep the same behaviors and then it would feel the exact same. But they were so dead set on it not happening. I just thought that was so strange. But I think the direction that you're going in is that, and sort of where I was too when it came to utilizing a Facebook group in general, is just, I do think that there's this, they do have this great treasure chest that seems to be utilized the less and less as this transition happens. So that's what's interesting to me, because even Christian said it himself, and he has his reasons. I'm not saying he doesn't have his reasons, but Christian has said it himself. He's less involved in that group lately. And even this podcast that came from that group, as it went on, it became less and less involved with that group. So maybe that's something that you're right should be examined moving forward.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also just it's a lot of fun, and I mean, I've made great friends through the Schmoeville Facebook group, and I've made great friends through our own Facebook group as well. And I mean, I don't want to sell it any more than I am, because I don't want it to seem like I'm talking about our own thing. Like, if people want to come there, that's fine. But if you don't want to come there, that's fine too. Because like I said, more people is kind of it can be a pain in the ass. But it's like I can't stress enough how important it is. Like it really is invaluable. And I think it's something that people should look into, but it also has to be somewhat organic. Like, you can't just be like, hey guys, we just started a Facebook. That almost never works, right? Like, we just started a Facebook group. Come hang out. Okay, sure. Like,
right.
If my only suggestion, and I feel like Mark and Christian would back this up too, because Schmoeville was something that was developed by fans as well, that it would be great to find some people to help be ushers of it, or shepherds of it. I mean, we could recommend people that I know would do a great job. People like Razika, people like Brad Donovan, and Luke as well could do a great job at it. But yeah, I just think it's necessary at some point.
Razika is the head admin of that. He's the one that runs that group.
That's right. He doesn't run Movie Talk by Movie Fans, right?
No, he runs.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about developing one for Collider.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood you. I thought you were asking for someone like Rasinka to run Schmoeville. I got confused. But no, yeah, you're right. Anyway. So last week we sort of talked about the idea of things like Collider Crash Course coming back, sort of the videos that come up that are sort of extensions of everything else, but they're short form extensions and they're timely. We were sort of talking about the Infinity War coverage ramping up, and this week they did not disappoint. In fact, the amount of additional content was sort of overwhelming, and I'm including Collider News in that. We had the Infinity War, everything you need to know. Let's talk about that video for a second, because it was sort of like a time lapse through the MCU, and Roka narrated, Copster put it together. The video was it was great. It was very beautiful. Agreed. It was funny, and it was just laid out really well. So I did admire the production of that. One thing that stood out to me that was particular with this video than any other video Collider has put out, it was the bars at the top and the bottom of the video, which is not that common on YouTube. It's very reminiscent of the viral videos on Instagram and Facebook, and we've seen them toy with this before. Actually, their Instagram videos now, under Dorian's watch, they all sort of have those bars. So I was wondering if you picked up on this, and then what you thought of that as a YouTube video.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely picked up on it. It was familiar. It was a great video. It was absolutely fantastic, and I think the channel has done a great job at sort of curating more stuff that is shareable. Unfortunately, this video, while it obviously could appeal to a lot of people, it's not as shareable just because it's so long. And I don't know how you break that up, right? Like, you really can't break a video like that up. So I don't know why it was specifically laid out in the way that it was. Maybe there's a reasoning for it. I have no idea. But obviously you can still distribute it on something like Facebook. But, again, it's a 10-minute video. I don't usually see a lot of videos like that on Facebook. I just think it was really good, and it was nice too, because that's something we were questioning last week of, are we going to see this ramp up speed to leading into Infinity War, because they need to capitalize as much as possible, and they did, and we got a lot of really, really good content, including that, and also the Infinity War fantasy draft, which popped up on my feed before Movie Talk. It was the first video of the day. Had a great time watching this. We got to see Mark Ellis back on the podium, reminiscent of the Collider Town Hall. We got to see the Schmo's curtain, which we don't get to see that often. I call it the Schmo's curtain. Also the Instagram model curtain.
Also the Schmo Down curtain.
Oh, yeah, they do use that there, don't they? It's still a Schmo curtain, right? We could still brand it the Schmo curtain.
Sure.
Anyways, it was a different video. It was an interesting video. You go all the way down to, I mean, guys, listen, we get into the nitty-gritty with this stuff. I even noticed the fact that they were using like background music while this whole thing was going on, which kind of changed the dynamic of most videos that we see. I know they do that from time to time, but watching a video like that was this long form, it was a longer video too. And it seemed like they even trimmed it down a little bit. There were some jump cuts in there that I typically don't see from Collider footage. It was just done really, really well, and it was a lot of fun. I love the idea of posting this on social media for people to make their own like fantasy drafts. This is a thing that I would have been fine with just taking in the content and listening to the debates and the discussions. It took me all of like 2 minutes before I couldn't help but make my own list. Like that's how enthralling this video was and exciting. I hope I don't know what the numbers are on it, but I hope they look at it, and I hope that they do more content like this, because it was a lot of fun. It was done very well. Mark nailed it as the host of this thing. no better host in
course.
the world to do something like this. He is so great, and not only just issuing these questions and issuing these rules and getting people's takes, but taking the information that somebody gives. And I don't know if it was just edited this way or what, but it was like he was listening to the people talk and watching people's facial expressions as they were giving their takes and being like, ooh, Dorian, you had a problem with this. What was it about the, stuff like that is pro level stuff that we need to champion. What was your take on this whole video?
Well, you know why Ellis is so good at that?
Was it?
Because he's a great listener. He's a great listener.
He is a great listener.
He is. And so, yeah, I think it was funny. I was kind of laughing a little bit because after someone would give their rundown, it would cut to Schnepp, and Schnepp would be like, while I see your point, I have to disagree. So part of me was like, did they cue them to do that, or was it natural? And it was just that harsh of a cut to where we're sort of in the middle of that take. It was so kind of... It just made me laugh. It was just kind of funny because
we don't see a lot of videos like that on Collider, do we?
I know.
I mean, that's a very YouTube thing to do. Like that's something that Jeremy Johns does. Just like super cuts. I do that in my album reviews that I do.
Right.
Those super cuts like that, they can be jarring if you're not used to them, and that's something I wasn't used to either.
Well, I disagree with you, including Mantis. I don't know. I just kind of thought it was funny.
Terrible Schnepp impression.
It wasn't so much an impression. I was just kind of quoting him. I wasn't trying to do the thing. But Scrimble Scrambles. I just kind of thought I thought it was funny how they were like talking to each other, but it felt like they weren't comfortable with each other. It was kind of funny. But yeah, I think that's exactly you nailed it. I think that's exactly what someone like Fernandez, I don't know who came up with this idea, but it's what Fernandez wants. The idea that this video made you want to do it yourself. I mean, that's why Scoreboard is so cool, because I played along with the Last Jedi Scoreboard. I had a competition with my sister, and like that's the kind of stuff that Fernandez wants to hear, is that we are participating at home with all of this stuff. I also liked how they threw in like Amy Dallin and Jay Washington. They might not have been, I guess it depends on when they filmed it, but they might not have been on that particular show the day that it was released, yet we were still able to see some of those faces. And hopefully, I don't know, I want to see more of this type of video. I don't know what else you do it for yet, because there's only so many fantasy drafts you can do, because obviously it's just the roster and the franchise that we're speaking to. So I wonder what else you can do with this type of format.
I think there's a lot you can do, because I mean, there's stuff like this that exists on social media already. Like I'll see people post like an image of a bunch of bands with this sort of salary cap thing, and they're like, "Oh, pick your perfect concert." And stuff like that. It's more, I feel like the secret is in the scenario that you're building. Like obviously this one was build your Avengers team, but obviously you could do this with Star Wars. I'm sure you could do it with horror movies in a weird way. Like, who's your perfect death squad or something? I don't know. Who would you want to hang out in the Purge with you or something like that? I have no idea.
I'm not saying it's limited. I guess I'm just saying I'm excited to see what else they introduce with this idea.
You want it to be sustained. So did you pull up the numbers for this by any chance?
I can very quickly.
Go ahead and pull that up, because one of the things that I was worried about, so this came out on Monday, is that right? I think that's right. So
no, it was later in the week. It wasn't Monday.
Whatever day that came out on, it might have been Wednesday, but whatever day that came out on, by the end of the day, this is just me personally. It's not a criticism. It was yesterday. Wow. My CT is in full effect right now.
It has 25,000 views.
That's great. That's fantastic. So,
can I mention real quick that Everything You Need to Know video has 160,000 views, which is also fantastic.
Great. I was a little bit worried about how successful this video would be. Obviously, we can rely on something like a YouTube search algorithm, and that's fine. Like, it's fine for people just to stumble upon it. It still means it can be successful. But yesterday was a weird day for me to be a Collider watcher and fan, because the first time ever I noticed that my own subscription feed was a little it was too bogged down with Collider stuff. So I subscribe to a lot of YouTube channels, as I'm sure a lot of people out there do. And this is just my own personal take. It's not even a criticism. They can do whatever they want. But for the first time ever, I've had the thought run across my mind of, are they putting out too much content to the point where it could bother people? Like, I think they released 8 videos yesterday. And that's a lot. That's a lot to be in your feed. And I thought about the user experience of somebody... let's say you're just a Jedi Council or just a Star Wars fan, and you just take in Star Wars related content via Collider. Like, to find those, you can go to a playlist, of course, that would have that stuff. But if you were to just go to their main landing page, it's difficult to navigate to find exactly what you want. And obviously that's a problem that only diehard fans who subscribe to the channel are probably going to have. But I just thought it was an interesting concept and an interesting idea. Like, is there too much stuff going on? Because the only time I ever unsubscribe, obviously I'm not going to unsubscribe to Collider. That would be an interesting twist. But
oh man, that might be a great storyline we could add later down the road.
So, but the only time I ever do unsubscribe to things on social media, on YouTube, is when they annoy me, when there's so much content out there that I don't care about, that it's making it hard for me to navigate through my own subscription box. I'm just like, I don't even need this anymore. So I don't want that to be an issue for people. It could be my thing. It's a subjective thing. But for the first time, it did go through my head since this new change, since they're casting a wider net. What are your thoughts of this whole thing?
I have a lot of thoughts. So let me start with sort of my viewership habits, if you will. So I don't watch every single Collider news, only because I just don't need it. Like, if I knew who was on the panel, and sometimes I do, sometimes I see posts on Instagram promoting the thing, or somebody might tease that Riley and Roka talked about this or whatever, and then I might be curious. But the fact of the matter is, because I have so many other outlets, because I know I have Movie Talk the next day, I don't feel personally obligated to watch every single Collider news. With that said, there might be a day that I watch all of them. There might be a day that I might watch none of them. It just depends. But the fact that I see them in my subscriptions doesn't necessarily bother me. Now, that is me. You are right in saying that there is a group of people that subscribe to the Collider video channel only to watch Jedi Council on Thursdays. Now, I would argue that person probably knows to just pay attention on Thursdays. They know it comes out at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard. Maybe it doesn't matter at all that there's another 6 days of Collider programming.
They do other content sometimes too. I just throw that out there, like Rebels stuff or other footage like that. Just wanted to insert that in.
Right, absolutely. So I guess to better answer your question, point being, it doesn't really matter how much they put out. I just watch what I'm going to watch. But there are also plenty of days where I might be off of work. I might have nothing to do. I might watch Movie Talk, and I might be bored, and I might want to watch more Collider stuff, and I don't necessarily have it yet. So it just kind of, I want it when I don't have it, but when I have it all, it doesn't bother me to sift through what I see. So to better answer your question, I have 2 ideas. One, bring some of that stuff and just let it play on the weekends. Because I don't know if there's any science and a YouTube algorithm behind this, but why can't the everything you need to know about the MCU video come out on Saturday? Why can't the Fantasy League draft come out on Sunday? Maybe not those particular ideas, just the general idea of filming something, producing it, and then having the time to upload it whenever you want. I would like to see them maybe toy with scheduling something on the weekends, something fun like that. Because you're right, there was one day where it was like 8 uploads compared to maybe a Monday when it's only 4. And that might annoy some people. But I don't necessarily think it's a general broad problem. Collider needs to watch how much they're putting out. I think I'm just kind of using this as an extension to arrive at the idea of them putting more content out or preparing us for the content. Instead of just on Movie Talk, Ellis mentioning, by the way, we did this fantasy draft video. What if they made a graphic, promoted it on Instagram, they post on Monday, watch out for Wednesday's fantasy draft of Marvel's.
Right. Yes.
Like that's like a Gary V thing. That's the next step, and I think Collider will eventually get to that point where they are able to, depending on how much produced product they have, they will be able to prepare sort of a promotional package for each video. And I'm not saying that there has to be a grandiose effort to it. It could just be an Instagram graphic that you post every now and then on Twitter, Instagram, what have you. I think that's the next step. And then we'll know that this video is coming out at this particular time, and the fans that care will care, and the fans that don't.
Yeah, and obviously it's a weird thing to complain about. It's honestly a little strange for me personally to talk about, or maybe just us in general, because this idea, I get the business behind it, right? You want to do the news stuff as soon as it happens for the algorithm to pick you up. You want to be first so that you get those clicks, you get that SEO. And I understand that. I employ that in my own YouTube content. We employ it on our own channel. But, so for our own personal YouTube channel, we employ this, we utilize this method of putting out as much content as possible because we're a growing channel, like way less than Collider. And we need to accumulate as many subscribers as possible, and they need to do that as well. However, there will be a day where, let's say, if so much of our audience is there specifically for movies or for music, that we may have to make a call where for the amount of YouTube content that we're distributing, we may need to break off into a separate channel because it might not be conducive to our subscriber base to force them to take in all this other content. Obviously, that's much more difficult when you're talking about all these other niche communities of fans, these nerd communities for people who are just there for comic book stuff, people who are just there for general movie stuff, people who are just there for Star Wars. I get the business behind it. The other thing I want to throw out, too, is there are some times I feel like when there are movie news stories like an Infinity War, a Star Wars thing that we know are going to get huge hits, right? Especially with videos, and this isn't really a news video, but the everything you need to know about the MCU, we know that's going to do well. But there are also some ones that we know that are going to be a wild card. Maybe it'll do well, maybe it'll resonate with some people, but it's never going to get that same pop that some of these hotter properties are going to get. Would it be beneficial or more beneficial to do, like, at the end of the day, a 15-minute news rundown of all the news stories that happened that day, and then throw in some of those smaller ones as well? Maybe Riley hosts it since he's the one that sort of compiles a lot of this news. Maybe you bring in a Frosty Weintraub. I don't know. I also understand that is what Movie Talk is to a certain extent, but it's also different. We've been talking about that a lot lately. Like, Movie Talk is more of a discussion about the news as opposed to reporting the news. But I could see that happening down the road.
I do think you might have a redundancy issue with that, but stuff like this is also this is a trickier conversation because, like I said, I felt like I was obligated to reveal my viewership habits, and I think it can hurt your head a little if you think about the subscriber that only cares about Star Wars when you are, like, factoring that idea when you're making a decision about the Schmo Down. Like, I think it can make your head hurt a little when you think about every single individual viewership habit, every single individual that's there for a different reason, and that might be too many. That rubric might be way too extensive when it comes to organizing and producing additional and new content. And so I don't know, that might begin to get a little too fluffy. I did think that you brought up a good point, because if Collider is willing to create a new YouTube channel, and maybe we can expand on this like maybe next week or something, but if Collider is willing to expand and create a YouTube channel for the podcast network, just having one specific for news is also interesting. I don't know how. It's hard because the only reference I have for that kind of move is with what Screen Junkies did, where Screen Junkies built this channel essentially from honest trailers, and then they later on introduced a Screen Junkies show and movie fights, and then that was the Screen Junkies channel. Then they introduced Screen Junkies News. And I remember hearing about this idea. They actually took over Clever Movies YouTube channel, so it was sort of like a express lane fast pass, if you will. They sort of already had an established YouTube channel instead of having a new one. That's not really a criticism. It's owned by the same company. Defy Media ran both. But when they introduced Screen Junkies News and they announced some of the stuff that they were doing, part of me was like, so why doesn't this fit under the original channel? Like, it was just kind of hard. And then Screen Junkies News essentially became their version of Collider. So I guess what my point is, if they decided to do a Collider News YouTube channel, I'd be curious to see if it was run by the .com side. And it would have to justify it, because I think the programming would have to offer something. It would have to be different enough to justify that new channel. Otherwise you might become redundant and it might blur lines a little bit.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say about this is one thing that sort of just solves this problem, not 100%, but solves this problem for that casual fan that is only there for one specific show, are these podcast feeds, right? They've broke off into these other things. I don't know what other content is going to live on Jedi Council's podcast feed besides that. It seems like something like a Rebels review would also live there as well. And obviously you're taking out, maybe there's some people that are just super diehard fans of the video content, and that's might not be the best option for them. Like, oh, we'll just go listen to it over here. But at least it does exist, and I think that's beneficial. That's 100% a step in the right direction.
I'm not saying it's a good idea, but I just had the idea. I just thought of what it would be like if any of their shows, if Collider Video's presence on YouTube had the exact same format and structure as the podcast network. Like, what if one day they announced, here's the Collider Jedi Council YouTube channel? Like, if that was ever a reality, that would just kind of blow my mind. It's such a weird thought.
Yeah.
Speaking of redundancy, and this is sort of the last thing. So we saw what Now, Later, or Never. We saw what that's like. They're doing one video per movie. I sort of asked that last week. I didn't know if it was going to include all of them. I didn't know what day it would be out. So it looks like they're just going to cover one movie and it can go out whenever. So like today, I think they released the I Feel Pretty, and I'm sure they'll do another one if there's another big movie coming out this weekend. So we saw that laid out. And for one, I think it's cool. I think it's a cool show. It makes a whole lot of sense. I think, I'm not saying take it away from YouTube, but to my knowledge, they haven't put it on Twitter or they haven't put it on Facebook. So maybe they will one day, because I think that kind of format fits some social media stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, the show was specifically developed to be shareable, it seems. I thought I did maybe see it on Facebook. I could be wrong.
Okay.
The Instagram videos now, I think 1 minute or a minute and a half. I can't remember.
I think they're just 1 minute.
So you could
I guess you can't.
You could break it up. You could break up Perry's reaction and then Roka's reaction, but or just compile the two potentially. I don't know. I like it. I like the format. It's definitely something new. It's something different. It's such a quick and easy, digestible way to get that quick movie take, and it's something that I had mentioned prior to, it might have been when we were talking about this, just having a source of like, I just want to know if I should see this movie or not. Like,
right.
I don't necessarily need like a whole integral breakdown of everything. And I feel like that's an answer to that. It seems like we are still going to get the additional content that would come with like I'm sure we're going to get a ton of like, do you remember when Last Jedi came out? It seemed like there were like 10 reviews for it on Collider. Like
they announced that today.
I must have missed it.
There was a version of this conversation that we were going to have where I was going to acknowledge there were people, just a few. I'm not saying it's a majority. I saw some people concerned like this is taking away from the people that really value film criticism and discussion. if you're reducing that to now, later, or never, some people are just the fans of them sitting down and talking about it. So they announced today that in addition to now, later, or never, now, later, or never is going to probably, I think they're going to try to do as many films as possible. Like we saw last week, Rampage, and they also did Truth or Dare. Rocha announced today on Movie Talk they're going to do something called Review Talk, which is similar to what you're talking about, but it is a weekly show. I think on Fridays. It's a weekly show. I know. And they're going to cover the biggest movie that comes out that weekend. They will have that review discussion there. And it's called Collider Review Talk.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, put that go ahead and put that on a Saturday. Well, maybe not necessarily. I get I don't know.
It might be Saturday, I don't know.
It's a lot on Friday.
I kind of don't like the name. Review
Talk?
Yeah,
I don't know. Collider Reviews. There you go. Problem solved.
I don't know. Maybe like I don't know, just this isn't any better. It's cliche. Just like round table or I don't know, some kind of, I don't know. Rampage round table. There you go.
But then that's just are you doing a weekly Rampage show?
No, I was just implementing the title. It could be Truth or Dare Roundtable. It could be any of it. It doesn't have to be Roundtable, okay? I'm thinking on the fly. I think Review Talk sounds weird, okay? That's all I'm saying.
All right.
I don't know. Do we have anything else? Can it wait till next week?
I don't think so. It's bedtime, dog. It's 1:17 in the morning.
Yeah. That was a healthy show. And I don't know. I hope we helped out, Fernandez. Frank, we love you. Snep, I hope you got some value out of this. We didn't really talk about you. Oh, I forgot to mention I love Rocha being this off-air character for Heroes, but I'll dig into that a little bit next week. Yeah, I think that was a healthy episode. We did our duty for this week, and I don't know. That's all I got. Jaye Williams. Not only do I want you to plug your stuff, but make sure you get in a good Sight and Sound plug as well.
Well, of course, as always, you can find me online at Jaye Williams, J to the A to the Y to the E, on Twitter and Instagram. It's the same for both. You can also check out our own personal YouTube channel. You want to stop by, you want some more Ryan and Jaye Williams in your life. Do you want to know our movie thoughts? Do you want to know our TV thoughts? You want to know our music thoughts? It's called Sight and Sound. There's a link in the description box of this podcast below. Check it out. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Get involved. We have a Facebook group like we've been talking about for people to talk about pop culture stuff. I do a music show every single Friday on Sight and Sound where I go over the week's new releases and I cover a big topic. Listen, we've got you covered. All right. If you're not getting it from Collider, which you probably are, we've got some other stuff over here. TV talk, you miss it? It's all right. We've got it over there. We're talking about Legion on Sight and Sound. Did I get everything? What did I miss?
Well, I'll finish it up. So you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at WhatUpSnell. Every single Monday, our weekly flagship show, Sight and Sound Weekly, debuts on our podcast feed and the SK Plus YouTube channel. Thank you, boys. And yeah, you are absolutely right. If you are watching Legion right now, you can get all of our thoughts. The links to everything Sight and Sound are in this very description. You can check us out and see what we are all about. Our content is pretty much available virtually anywhere you can get content. Every podcast app, every podcast goes to YouTube. YouTube has all the videos. We are everywhere, and that is how we like it. With that said, thank you so much for hanging out with us on week 2 of Collider Afterthoughts. We will see you next week. Take it easy.